quarterbacks. And Dave, I will start with you here. Phillip Rivers, Jameis Winston. Tell us about Phillip Rivers in this matchup against the Colts.
Are you surprised that Phillip Rivers is on my list? And the first quarterback that I want to talk about, I've been talking about him for years. And this offense in LA is going to flow through him because Melvin Gordon isn't there. He's a habitual hot starter. Each of his last 5 seasons, he's been great right out of the gate. And he's got solid matchups across the board against the Colts secondary. I would look for Hunter Henry. Mike Williams is going to get involved. Of course, Keenan Allen's going to do his thing. But Austin Eckler is a pass catcher is going to be a factor as well. I think Phillip Rivers is a top 10 fantasy quarterback this week, starting him over Aaron Rodgers, starting him over Ben Roethlisberger. And I'll do the exact same thing with Jameis Winston. We know the Bucs run game stinks. We know the 49ers pass defense, I think it's suspect. The Bucs defense isn't very good. Should be a high-scoring game. It's a great matchup specifically for Chris Godwin and Jameis Winston's tight ends. I think Jameis can find 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. I almost feel like I have him ranked too low.
It'll be a fun game to see how not only he operates, but the quarterback on the other side of the field, and Jimmy Garoppolo, and what should be a fun shootout. Let's go to your quarterbacks now, Heath. One you talked about a lot already in Mitchell Trubisky. You love him in this matchup against the Packers tonight. But tell us about Dak Prescott, because now that Elliott is back, can he still be a dominant fantasy quarterback enough to start him this week in the season opener?
Yeah, I think if you look at Dak Prescott's history, whenever he's had a true number 1 wide receiver like he has with Amari Cooper, and he's had Ezekiel Elliott on the field, he has been a top 10 quarterback. Last year, after Cooper arrived in Dallas, he was on pace for 4,300 passing yards. They actually threw the ball a little bit more than you would expect last year. You know he's going to give you a little bit of production on the ground. Fantastic matchup against a bad Giants team. I wouldn't worry too much about them pounding the ball into the ground with Zeke. I've got him for 16 touches. I think they may throw it just a little bit more than they will over the rest of the season. Dak and Cooper both get off to a fast start. He's a top 8 quarterback for me. I actually like him more than I like Trubisky.
Should be fun to see how this Cowboys offense looks against what could be a very bad defense for the Giants. For me, I'm going with our start of the week. That's Lamar Jackson. And probably the most shocking thing is where I have him ranked. He's my number 3 quarterback for this week, behind only Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. I'm excited about the setup for him against the Dolphins. We talked about this all throughout the week, all throughout the season. Dolphins are obviously going to struggle, and I think you just look at what this defense is. Their probably best pass rusher is Charles Harris, and over 2 seasons he has 3 sacks. I don't think they're going to get very close to touching Lamar Jackson. The key is who helps elevate him. Could be all of his receivers for all we know. So we'll see how this receiving core does, but I expect him to have one of his better rushing games, one of potentially his better passing games. And I always like narrative, and he's going back home, Pompano Beach kid, going back to South Florida. So hopefully Lamar Jackson puts on a show in front of his home crowd. And then Tom Brady, who always puts on a show in front of his home crowd. He just dominates the Steelers, 5-0 against them in Foxborough, 18 touchdowns, no interceptions. Having Josh Gordon, having Julian Edelman healthy, I think it's a good setup for Brady. So a guy that was on the borderline of being drafted as number 1 quarterback, depending on when you had your draft, after getting Gordon back, that helps him in a big, big way. And I think you can trust Tom Brady this week. Let's go now to the quarterbacks that we're seeing. Dave, Ben Roethlisberger, and Matt Ryan. Tell me about Roethlisberger, because piggyback off of this game against Brady.
He's the opposite of Brady. Brady's crushing the Steelers at home. Roethlisberger struggles at Foxborough, and the Steelers have kind of talked about it and hinted that something goes wrong with their headsets, their radio frequencies, whatever is going on when they play against New England. Guess what? It leads to bad numbers for Big Ben. He's been under 21 fantasy points in 4 of 5 career games against Foxborough. But that's not why you should sit him. You should sit him because he doesn't have Antonio Brown, and when he did have Antonio Brown for his last 4 games, I think he is just going to keep on struggling without him. When he had AB, 21 or fewer fantasy points each time. That was even when he was at home. I think Roethlisberger is going to continue to have a hard time. I'm wondering how the Patriots are going to defend Juju, especially in the red zone. If Roethlisberger's going to have a big game, we're going to need to see one of those other wide receivers and Vance McDonald step up. I think McDonald can be okay. I don't think those other receivers will. That's why he's well outside of my top 12.
And you're also sitting Matt Ryan as well. Heath, your 2 quarterbacks, again, one we already touched on, Aaron Rodgers. You're a little bit concerned about the matchup against the Bears. The other one, though, is going to be very intriguing to see how Kyler Murray operates.
Yeah, and I am excited to have Kyler Murray on my team. I just don't want to start him under any circumstances, really regardless of the matchup, but I don't think this is necessarily a good matchup. The Cardinals really looked in the preseason like they're going to have a hard time blocking anyone. This Detroit team, the strength of that defense is the front 7. I think they can get after Kyler Murray. And the other thing is they want to slow it down. Arizona wants to play really fast. I kind of feel like Detroit wins that battle in week 1. Detroit did very good last year against running quarterbacks. That might be the one way that Kyler is able to save himself on a given week. I'm not sure he can do that this week either.
I'm nervous. He's one of my sits as well, and I think you look at it this way. If you're looking at it from a positive thing for Kyler Murray, we went into a situation last year in the season opener where the Lions faced a rookie quarterback, and we thought, oh, it's going to be a bloodbath against Sam Darnold, and he lit them up. So maybe the same thing happens with Kyler Murray. I hope he has a better first pass attempt in his NFL debut than Sam Darnold, who threw a pick-6. But I do like this setup for the Lions defense. I think that offensive line is going to be tested for the Cardinals, and we'll see if they can hold up and if Murray can have some success. We've been talking about it all preseason. A vanilla offense for the Cardinals based on their preseason performance. Will that carry over to the regular season? I don't think so. So I'm cautiously optimistic about Murray for the rest of the year, but I don't want to trust him as a starting option this week. And the same thing with Matt Ryan, facing a very, very tough Vikings defense. As we know, they were second in terms of fewest touchdowns allowed to opposing quarterbacks last year. They bring back the majority of the same personnel. And while I do like Matt Ryan for the season, this is not necessarily the best setup for him, best matchup for him. And so you talk about how the Patriots are going to take away Juju. I'm curious to see if Julio Jones has a big game against Xavier Rhodes. I'd bet on Julio, but we'll see how this entire Falcons offense does operate against a tough Minnesota defense in their building. So let's go from now the quarterbacks to the running backs. And a lot of options to choose from here. Dave, you got one, though, that's been very, very polarizing, certainly over the course of the entire offseason and definitely of late with Damian Williams.
So LaShawn McCoy is supposed to ride in on his white horse and save that Chiefs running game. Doesn't need saving. I think Damian Williams is the better running back to have, certainly in week 1, because LaShawn McCoy, Andy Reid said it, still learning the offense, and Andy Reid doesn't want to put LaShawn McCoy in a situation where he's going to look bad. So I think this is a great opportunity to go with Damian Williams, and you drafted him to be a number 2 fantasy running back. And look at the matchup against Jacksonville. It looks really, really tough, but I think you're going to see Andy Reid and company attack those outside linebackers, attack those safeties. It's going to be a lot of Travis Kelce, but Damian Williams can go after those guys too. I think he makes a big difference in the passing game. I think he gets 5 catches, and we saw Kareem Hunt have a great game against the Jaguars last year on the ground. I think Damian Williams can find the end zone as well. So I'm not looking for a ton of yardage from him, but I think he can score. Call it 60 yards. That's good enough to be a number 2 fantasy running back.
Yeah, I'm nervous about Damian Williams just from the uncertainty of what could happen with however many touches LaShawn McCoy may get and whatever Darwin Thompson does against a very good Jacksonville defense that I think will be even better this year. So Williams is a sit for me. And again, I think it's going to be the same for a lot of people. Do you start Damian Williams or do you get away from him? Probably depends on what your roster looks like, but I would try and bench him if you can. For me, it's a flex at best. So when we get to my sits, you'll see him on there. I want you guys to debate Kenyan Drake for a second because you have him as a sit, you have him as a start.
Yeah.
You really trusting him against the Ravens?
I am going to trust him against the Ravens, especially in PPR, because the Dolphins are going to be checking down as they trail in this game against Baltimore. I think he can catch 5 or 6 passes, and that Ravens front 7 has changed from last year. 4 starters from last year, gone. Are they still dominant against the run? Can they cover Kenyan Drake? Brian Flores talked this week about how he wants to give Kenyan Drake more touches. I buy into it. I think he's a low-end starter.
I don't know if they can give anybody a lot of touches. We're talking about a team that struggled to run 50 plays a game last year against a team in Baltimore that ran 75. They're not going to let them have the football. They're going to play keep away, and you got to get first downs to keep drives going so that Kenyan Drake can keep touching the ball. I hate to say bad things about Kenyan Drake. He was one of my breakouts for the season. I think he's going to have a very good year. This is not the week to use him. I don't know if the Dolphins even get to midfield.
This is the Dolphins' offensive line. Paper. They're not going to stop anybody against Baltimore. You could have 100 new personnel on that Ravens defense. That Dolphins offense scares the bejesus out of me. I would not trust Kenyan Drake this week as well. Heath, your starting options, Austin Eckler, Chris Carson, Tariq Cohen. Again, Tariq Cohen playing tonight. But let's talk about Austin Eckler just a little bit more because you have him really, really high in your rankings.
Yeah, I've got him, and really I didn't even give him a huge workload, but I think this matchup against Indianapolis, while they are a much better defense than they have been in the past, this sets up well because I expect the Chargers defense to have their way with Jacoby Brissett and that offense. So it should be a run-heavy script. That's one of the reasons I'm actually a little bit worried about Phillip Rivers. His pass attempts were way down last year. That could have been because of Melvin Gordon. But I don't know that they're going to have to throw a lot in this game. I think Jackson and Eckler can both get 14-plus touches. Eckler's by far the best in the passing game. This Indianapolis Colts team had a real problem with pass-catching running backs last year. I've got him for 100 yards and a score.
Okay, so Eckler, Carson. I love the Chris Carson pick. I think it's going to be a dominant game for him. For me, it's Mark Ingram, Sony Michel, Phillip Lindsay. Lindsay's one that we had a little bit of a debate about, not necessarily about starting him, but in comparison to, let's say, Duke Johnson, for example. I just like the setup for Lindsay. He played against the Raiders twice last year. His first 100-yard game of his career came against Oakland, and then he had the wrist injury in Week 16, and as we know, did not play in Week 17, suffered through that injury all offseason. But I do think it's a good setup for Phillip Lindsay to come out and have a very good debut. No Theo Riddick, so we'll see if he's involved in the passing game. Dave, you brought up the point on our podcast about Devontae Booker. Obviously, Booker will be there, and as will Royce Freeman. I just think that Lindsay has an opportunity here to be their catalyst of their run game, and I think that will lead to him being a very good number 2 running back. The sits, we kind of touched on these guys a little bit. Dave, you have Aaron Jones, as we know, not necessarily somebody you want to trust. But Marlon Mack is worth getting into a little bit more. A lot of people questioning what to do with the Colts, and you look at this Chargers run defense, not great, not necessarily, good, not necessarily great, but could be something that keeps Marlon Mack in check a little bit.
The Chargers only allowed 2 100-yard rushers last year, and their defense is still going to be just as strong, if not stronger, against the run. And they're not going to fear the pass of the Colts like they would have if Andrew Luck were under center. If Luck was playing, then yeah, there'd be some opportunities for Marlon Mack. But we all agree that the Chargers have a pretty good chance to win that game, or win this game. Colts probably going to lose this game. How about this stat? The last 2 years, Marlon Mack has averaged 15.4 carries, 4.7 yards per carry, and has 12 touchdowns in Colts victories. In defeats, I hope you're sitting down, 6.8 carries per game, 3.7 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. He's played in the same amount of victories as defeats. I don't want to go with him. I think he's going to be run out of the game script. Might be a good week for Nyheim Hines in PPR.
Could be interesting to see how the Colts do operate again. It's going to be a change, as we know, no Andrew Luck, so we'll see if Mack is the guy for this offense behind what should still be a very good offensive line. So Heath, we talked about this. You're also sitting Marlon Mack, Kenyan Drake is somebody, but Derrick Henry. A lot of people, still buying into him as the guy here. That offensive line makes me really nervous.
Yeah, and I think there's a chance that he could have another stretch, not like last year, but a very good stretch as a number 2 running back. I don't want to use him in this situation. I talked about it a lot in the preseason, this Titans schedule. 8 to 10 offenses that we would consider elite offenses. In week 1, they get one of those offenses, the Cleveland Browns, and they may not have their 2 starting offensive tackles. So I think this could actually turn into a Dion Lewis game in the second half. I have Lewis projected for more fantasy points in PPR than Derrick Henry.
Man, that's just crazy to think about what Derrick Henry could do to a lot of fantasy drafts, especially if you drafted earlier before even the calf injury. But, 2 offensive linemen may be missing for this Titans team could be a little bit problematic. I have Henry as a sit. I have Damian Williams as a sit. I have Kenyan Drake as a sit. So we kind of tied in all these guys together. We were all kind of on the same page. To a certain extent, well, Heath's not on the same page. Dave likes Kenyan Drake, likes Damian Williams. So we'll see how this unfolds once we get to the end of week number 1.